Okay, we've got terrific speakers who are going to give us a wonderful presentation. Questions, of course, probably best after they've presented, because something you might be going to ask might come further in their presentation, but entirely up to both of them, whatever way at any stage you want to take questions. But at the end of each speaker, there'll be an opportunity. Mr. Mayor, could I ask you to come forward, please?
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Taking Sustainable Palmerston Forward. Palmerston has a sustainability strategy 2013 to 2018, and we're very proud of that we have this strategy. We're very proud that what we want to do in Palmerston is to make sure that the community, in terms of environmental, economic, all sorts of things, are sustainable, for the long future. And again, look, it's great to see so many of you here. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Andrew and Mark for giving up their time tonight. As a city, we're keen to undertake every opportunity to both understand the breadth of sustainability for possible implementation within our built and natural environment. Enjoy the night. I look forward to your presentations, and I'll hand it back over. Thank you.
So a large part of tonight is to talk about living water smart, I suppose. Happy National Water Week. We're in the middle of it at the moment. We're just doing a lot in Alice at the moment. I've just come up there and left the guys doing a lot more down there. And we're about to do a lot more over the next couple of days. The theme this year for National Water Week is innovation, and I always reflect upon the water efficiency programs that we're implementing up here. A lot of what we do and we say are very stock standard things to save water, but what is innovative is trying to find ways to get through to people to value the water and make some behaviour change. It's always innovative, and up here, like in Alice, we're trying a few different things because of the community we live in, and it's really exciting to do that. Hard at times, but quite rewarding. So for instance, in Alice, we're implementing Leak Week this week. We haven't really done anything like that before, and it really hasn't been run around Australia at all. So where we get people going around and reading every residential meter within the week. We do a 2-minute leak check, and we provide some advice to the people there. Our Facebook's been going nuts with good stories. We've had lots of people in our shopping centres the last few days asking how they can look for leaks in a much better capacity. All that stuff is on the website. It's been there for years, but it's that innovative way of just connecting with people and engaging. And today we had 3 deep people in lines waiting to just get that information. So it's just an innovative way, a different slant on the same old stuff, but works really well, and we get good community grab. So we're having good fun down there with that. But what I'll talk about tonight is more about the living water smart in the Darwin region. And what I thought I'd cover is just, the case for water efficiency, why we're even putting in living water smart. It's not just about deferring, a new dam or new sources. There's a few other things with that. And really, when you boil it down, it's about trying to change the norm up here. The norm of really not valuing water greatly and not taking water efficiency a bit as a higher priority in our everyday living. And that's about changing the norm. And usually we've got about 3 months when someone comes to town. If they come to town from down south and they're water efficient, we've got about 3 months before they change their mind and say, oh, what the heck, everyone else is doing this, I'll do it. So that's what we found in Alice and up here. I'll give you an update on the program. We're a couple of years into it. And I'll just give you a snippet of, we are planning for legacy with this program. We're not just doing the here and now. We're looking at what we can do to try and empower people as we get them through with that. So I'll give you a bit of a snapshot on all that. So the case for water efficiency, why do it? This graph here, and I apologise, I'm an engineer, love the graphs, sorry. So this makes me comfortable at the start. Look, if this is a diagram of our water production coming out of the dam and the Howard East Borefield, and it spans 79 to 2014. And what we're showing here is we go through cycles of going wet season, dry season, up and down every year, but there's this decade-long period of drying and wetting. Okay, we know we get that. So, for example, we had quite a serious drying period here back in '88. We don't know when we're going to hit it again, but we will. With the climate variability, we don't know how condensed or expanded that's going to be. So our minimum dam level is down here, where we typically go into water restrictions, okay, with that. So you can see here we came pretty close to it back in 88. And at that point in 88, we're only using about 28 billion litres a year. Right now we use 42. So we get that cycle back again, this drops extremely quickly and our storage is in trouble. So that's what alarms us a bit. We've only got 2 or 3 years if we have bad wet seasons where we can hit this level. And that's really what we're saying about trying to promote more water efficient use. Okay, so that's the production story. We either need new sources or we're looking at ways to use it more wisely. If you look at the consumption in a bit more detail, we go up here in the wet season, in the dry season, water consumption peaks up here, then it goes down again in the wet. What we're worrying is those minimums there. Those minimums every year just keep going up at a higher rate than population growth. So we're using more water. And then most of our water is tied to outdoor use or the climate. And then if you overlay climate on top of that, in the red you've got temperature. This is a bit of a doozy of a graph, sorry. And you've got rainfall down here. Rainfall's a bit of a no-brainer. When it rains, our water use drops. But look at this correlation with temperature as it climbs towards build-up about now. Water use skyrockets up. And this is only done to 2012, so our peak daily flow is about 160, or it did go up here, about 190. This year we had, because the low didn't come in January, we had these continuing all through January. So the message here is we are tightly tied to climate, okay? So climate variability is going to impact on that, on consumption as well, and it is outdoor water use or leakage. So if you look at how we rate against other cities, I've used 2012-13 here. That's our base year for Living Water Smart to, when we say we're going to say 25% of our water supply, we go back to that year. So in this year, Darwin was about 454 kilolitres a year average for a property. This is residential and going down. So areas similar to us, Cairns and Townsville, different climates, but highly tied to their climate and similar kind of areas you're looking there. They've reduced it. Cairns reduced their water use quite significantly before they went into water restrictions this year. So we have very high use. And just to give you some comparison there, if you're looking at wheelie bins, per day, each property up here uses about 5.5 wheelie bins of water per day. They were looking at about 1,200 litres. And if you're on a block that's relatively large, up to 2,000 square metres with a garden, you double that. You're using about 11. So we're tightly tied to the climate there, and you equate that down to southeast Queensland here. 8% of their water they use on their gardens. And even though it's a complete different climate to us, I don't know about you, but when I grew up around that area, the gardens were always pretty good. They were always growing, green, everything. And nowadays they only use 8%, even after years of not being on the restrictions. So we do use a lot of water. There's an argument there that you can pick off a lot of the low-hanging fruit and become better. And that's what we're trying to show through Living Water Smart. So, Living Water Smart, Pam said it, it's a 5-year program, trying to save 10 gigalitres per year over 5 years. It's the ultimate goal, and a lot of it's community engagement. So there's the team there with Costa at Tropical Garden Spectacular. So the strategy. So this is just a bit high level. I haven't found a better way to show this yet. I must change it, I suppose. But if you look here, this is just an arbitrary figure of how much we want to save in Living Water Smart as we go through the years. Water savings, just arbitrary, tied to what we know we can do in Alice. But really what we're trying to do here in the strategy is move people from an opinion of being indifferent about water efficiency, I don't care about it, don't tell me what I don't need to know, to embedded water efficiency here. So this is like down south. I don't know why I'm being water efficient, I just know how to do it. And that's what the kids are doing in Alice that we surveyed at the end of Alice Water Smart. Most of them that we got were 12 to 18, said, yep, I do this, I do this, I do this, but I don't know why, that's just the way of living. And that's what the kids we're learning now. So we're trying to move people along this continuum. How we do that strategically, start off with heavy education that we've hopefully just been through. I'll go through it a bit later this year, to an area of empowering them to embed those things. What that means in practical terms, or before that, We reckon we're about here at Living Water Smart. That's probably a bit optimistic about where people's water efficiency views were, and we're trying to get them out to this. By the end of Living Water Smart 2018, we'd love to have people taking actions and on the way to being embedded and empowered to do that. And then we'll look at what we do after that. What that means in practical terms is when we're trying to look at our operational stuff, it's about talking discourse about water wastage. It's wasted money, it's wasted water, and move that to it's just good business, a good practice to be water efficient. Right now it's about doing water audits. They want to move that to businesses and homes looking at their water efficiency plans. Businesses, they've got a plan, this is how we're going to use water. It's about coaching people now and trying to give them the tools and the understanding that the change that they can do will benefit them, and it is simple to them just doing it for themselves. That's what I'm finding in Alice after this week with the leaks. People are coming to ask us, how do I check for leaks every year in my place? Here's all the information, so you do it. Great, thanks. And off they go. That's what we want to get to. Industry guidelines with businesses and with schools and organisations. Here, this is how you can be water efficient. To in future, they just benchmark. I wonder what they're doing. Can I do it better? It's the simple business stuff in other areas in economics and competitiveness. We want to bring that into water efficiency. And it's about incentivising now, rebating, making it easy to switch over to the supply chains going, you know what, those water efficient products are great. We'll just bring them in and make them business as usual. So that's how we want to move people along. That's the strategy in all the areas we're looking for. The success factors that we know that we have to go through in order to achieve the results we're after, like what we learnt in Alice, it's about heavy education, making people understand the urban water supply, what the challenges and the issues are with that. Quite often it's joining the dots. When we went out surveying people at the start of Living Water Smart, we asked them who pays for the water, who pays for new sources, and most people said the government. No one said me. There's a disjoint between understanding that all of us in the room pay for all of this, and it goes through that cycle. So it's about education in that as well. Everyone has to do their bit. You can do as much as you can as council, but the one day that you blow a sprinkler off and it's shooting water on the road, you'll get nailed, and we'll get nailed for it. So we all have to be perfect, but we all have to do it all together. We can't have one segment. We can't ask residents to do something and our government or our roads or our councils aren't doing. You have to all move together with this. And the reason really you do that is the drivers here. We don't have a crisis. We don't have a big drought yet. We don't have all of that, okay, like down south. We don't have water restrictions. So it's about changing behaviour because it makes good sense and it's a better lifestyle choice. That's the longer, slower path to go through, and that's why everyone has to do their bit and not just ask each segment. We need that government support. That's hard, it's a slow road. It's hard these days when all the departments are going back to core business due to, being more efficient and all of that. It's harder to get integration and collaboration, but we're slowly getting there. But we need that leadership and support. So at the start of this, Living Water Smart is a cabinet document. It is a cabinet endorsed program. We report back to cabinet, and that gives us a lot more privileges to go and talk to departments and other organisations than just being an internal business plan that goes up. It's about responsibility. This is coming through at the moment on, and it's at a values level. We're not talking about opinions, how we feel. We're talking about a value here. There's a distinct responsibility issue. When we did the survey again at the beginning of Living Water Smart, a lot of people, like in Alice when we started, they said, look, I'm okay, I think I'm fairly water efficient, but those guys over there are not. You need to really go talk to them. And it's coming through on our Facebook at the moment. It's the same sort of thing. Why should I decrease the use of using 3.5 kilolitres a day at my house when the school over irrigates every Sunday morning when I walk the dog? So even though there's a point there, but still there's no acknowledgement that maybe I do use water too excessively and I can easily reduce that. So responsibility is a big thing. And it's about water use outdoors and leakage. That's where the bulk of the education has to go, and that's where people are using most of the water. We want to engage the high water users, organisations and residents. You've got to do it personally. You've got to do it face to face. It's behaviour change. It's about motivating them face to face and in detail. Most people understand water efficiency. When you sit down and talk, and probably in the questions afterwards, if I if I don't overrun too much. Everyone will have a personal story about water use, and everyone will want to share that. It's about tying that personal story and that wish to be water efficient with facts. You know, did you know if you keep that leak in your toilet going that you'll use 13 wheelie bins every week of wasted water? Do you want to, wheel 13 wheelie bins out every week and put them on the curb and just throw the water in the gutter? Because that's what you're doing. Talking about it in that kind of value raises the priority and it joins the dots for people. Most people are okay with that. I know Pat might disagree with me. He's been out there talking hard to all these people. But it's about trying to find that values thing. So, what have we achieved? We've almost hit the 2 gig mark as far as identified savings and some real savings with that. In detail, this is up to the end of July when I did the reporting. So we're looking at about 200 residential audits, identifying 61 megalitres. So when we looked at the water residents could save versus what they were actually using, there's about a 36% saving achievable there. That equates to about $112,000. When we looked at non-residential audits and consults, 26 megalitres, 42% we identified could be saved. With schools, we're a bit slow in getting that initiative underway, and there's more savings to be achieved there with 14. That's quite low, but a lot of some of those I think were schools without ovals, without a lot of that. So when you add all of these up at the hotels and the rebates claimed, 1,770 rebates, that's 56 megalitres based on the Wells rating, and that's 103,000 saved. So overall, we're looking at about 1.7 gigs, 34% of water use identified to be saved, saving about 380. So this is really the community saving. This is very high level metrics with that. Every milestone, which is every 3 months, we'll hand out a poster on a lot more detailed achievements, of which these are in there as well. One of the other things, and this is a great tool that's worked out very successful for us with Facebook, and now we're trying to find resourcing to get more on Twitter and Instagram. And when we did the Y campaign, which you may have seen our sketch ad, our 1-minute sketch ad on television, hopefully you did. I should have played it here maybe to bore you, but that was really aimed at trying to distill a lot of education of our urban water cycle in common speak to everyone. And we tried to do it over a minute, and the sketch ad is a good way of just putting in a lot of facts and figures and telling a story, leading people to a crescendo with that. That was great. We found Facebook was really good, and one of the reasons I love it is we know 30,000 people or 30,000 clicks watch that TV ad. When we go to the TV studios, they can only tell us how big their audience would be. They can't tell us how many people are looking at it. There it is on Facebook. 30,000 people viewed that, which is for us is huge. And we had where are we with over that period, we took about 200 water consults, and we had about 6,500 web page views with that. Other achievements were the Swap It campaigns, where we had over a week, an intense week, we offered a showerhead exchange program. Bring in your old showerhead, we'll give you a new water efficient one. That's a hotel quality. We did some out of Palmerston, some at Casuarina and some in at Darwin. That was great. We had 1,100 showerheads swapped, and Beth this week is putting out an expressions of interest for artists to put together all of those 1,100 used showerheads into some sort of art creation. Hopefully maybe one for Palmerston and one for Darwin. We can have 2 out of it. So we'll see how that comes about. Public events, we've been out and about with the community engagement, with expos to do with public and with targeted audiences. So the social marketing has been coming along. We've done a lot on reduced network losses. So that's our car park at Ben Hammond, having a lovely leak there for a few days. So we got that sorted out. The water efficiency service. I talked before about one of the principles was engaging water users and high water users personally. So this is about what Patrick does every day, going out and talking to residents, auditing, having a look at how they use water and better ways to use it, and offering incentives to help them make the change. It's about not changing a lifestyle. It's low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit is leaks and just rescheduling a garden. The most popular thing we find after these guys have been doing their great work is people change their schedules, or our guys change it for them and they keep it there. It can be as simple as that. I think you'd find it unusual. Most people don't understand a lot of their irrigation systems, do they, Pat? You know, it's just understanding that. I had someone in Alice that moved into a new house. They'd been there, you know, a while, no idea what's turning on and off. So just those little things, and the change behaviour is rescheduling. As far as dealing with businesses, Alex here, he loves the interaction with community. He loves the community engagement that we provided him, and he was great. He found a big leak as well. What was it, $6,000 a year or something, or $10,000 a year I think he was spending. By the way, the biggest residential leak that we've found, $10,000 a year. Someone was paying in their bill just to cover a leak. No idea had it. So it gets pretty high. And there's the Swap It campaign. That's Pat. That's your, Patrick, that's one of your success stories there. That was an email to you from Melissa. And the barriers to change I mentioned. It's about responsibility. Okay? This really happened. This was from the balcony where I was living. But it's about taking responsibility. You know, I mentioned that earlier.
Put it in the bath.
He didn't even have it parked on the lawn.
Nope. Unbelievable. So there you go. So these are some of the key people we've been working with. There's probably a couple of extra there. You can see City of Palmerston up there proud, and Darwin, and the government. So dealing with parks and wildlife, they've been very positive in engaging with us at the down at the Botanic Gardens, and then working up north of Cas Beach. There's more to come there. Trailer Boat Club, Sky City, and INPEX, and Quentin at REINT. They're all engaged. It's a good story, and that just grows and grows. So I mentioned before about legacy, and what we're trying to create are tools to move people along that continuum. So those that can be empowered to do it, they can. This is one of those things. This is an online tool, the Garden Watering Planner. 3 questions, and mums and dads can get an idea of the best irrigation systems to use in their place, an idea of a default irrigation schedule for the types of plants or grass. They can print that out, and that's based on what's topical up here in Darwin. We'll refine that over time. We'll build another one like this for commercial irrigators probably. That's on the cards. And the other legacy item is smart metering. Okay, so these guys, when we go out and do audits and consults, we'll use loggers, like temporary smart meters, to get an idea of people and businesses' habits when they're irrigating, what's happening. And this is an idea of the portal for residents. So this is what we've implemented in Alice, and we'll bring this up here as well. So it's not just about showing the graphs of water use in hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. It's about offering them tips and tricks and some metrics here to gauge how well they're going with that. And we're trying a bit of engagement here of sharing this with social media. We'll see how it goes. Again, you know, these are the things, the ideas. Get it out there, be innovative, try and engage and refine as you go along. But we will be implementing permanent smart metering up here in Darwin in businesses and with residents. And what you'll typically find, the favourite here is you can log in and then you can manage your own water consumption from then on with your own login, and you can put in your email address. You can get your leak alerts. If the water through the meter doesn't go down to 0 within a 48-hour period, you'll get an email saying, looks like you've got a leak. You can get onto that. Landlords love it. They get billed quarterly. So if they spring a leak second day of their quarterly bill, and it has happened, you know, they don't hear about it till they get their bill 3 months down the track. So this is a good benefit to them. You can also get an alert if you have extra high flows. So if irrigation's turning on and off, like it was in Alice on Monday, we found a leak that was 65 litres a minute because their main irrigation system had blown out, and it would only be on at night, and then it would stop in the morning. And obviously they didn't see it for a while, but sometimes you could be unaware of that, and so you've got the extra high flow as well on that. And again, we're learning. We've got some other innovative ideas to try and throw in with this. But embracing technology and moving towards that digital age and sensing, this has got some great value for customers and internally. We can look at other things like water quality within our system. We can look at backflow, things like that as well. So it's got, the technology's got some good promise. Oops. And I've made it to the end.
So I'm going to talk about, sort of through a macroscope rather than a microscope, about food systems and how water and land and energy all work together and how they're all affected by climate. And I'll try and finish up with some ideas for Palmerston, which you can take or reject or do whatever you like with. The bit that makes this planet, what is it, third rock from the sun or whatever, habitable is that little blue tinge there. That's the atmosphere. And human activities have changed the chemistry of the Earth's atmosphere. And the most comprehensive summary of that is this big report, the last one of which was in 2014 from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I was a chapter author of chapter 23, the Australasia chapter, with a bunch of colleagues, and it gives a very, very conservative, very sober assessment of the fact that we've just about doubled the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, and as has been proven since, I think there's an argument in physics as to whether this was proven in 1830 or 1890, but if you increase the concentration of CO2, you'll increase temperature, and we're doing that experiment on a planetary scale. And so we're seeing increases in temperature around the world. So this is average land surface temperature, and the plus 0.5 is compared to the 20th century average. And if you can look at the hottest years since we've been collecting records, 98, 2009, 5, 13, 10, you can see apart from 1998, they've all happened this century. So we haven't had a cooler month than the 20th century average now for more than 300 months. You can be in your 30s now and you haven't lived through a cold month compared to the 20th century average. So the Earth's warming up, and that's going to have very big implications. So you can see in 2015 we're nearly at 1 degree above the long-term average. And the world's now trying in this big meeting in Paris in next month is about trying, all the governments of the world trying to figure out how jointly they can put in place measures that would keep the world from heating beyond 2 degrees, about double the warming that's already taken place. Now, there are lots of people who think that that is already quite an adventurous thing to be aiming for, that things are going to get very uncomfortable in many parts of the world, and for certain industries, like, say, agriculture in Australia, if we have 2 degrees of warming. But that's what the governments have agreed they're going to shoot for. So I'm not going to talk more about climate change except to say that it affects everything else we're talking about. But leaving aside climate change, we've already got population growth. So we've got to about 7 billion people. We're on track for 10 billion people on a finite planet. This is the graph of freshwater availability per capita, 70% of which is used in agriculture. But since the Second World War, roughly every calorie of food energy we consume has required 1 litre of water to produce. And that rule of thumb is held for a long time now. Now, it's not universal. If you shop in the middle aisles of the supermarket and buy lots of biscuits and chips, it's way more than 1 litre per calorie. If you just buy lettuce or rice from Bali or whatever, then it's a lot less than 1 litre per calorie. If you buy fresh fruit and veg, it's a lot less. But processed food's much higher. I won't even tell you what whiskey and stuff is. But obviously in a finite planet with a growing population, this is a problem. And when we've looked at all the big irrigated food bowls around the world, most of them are like the Murray-Darling Basin. They've already fully allocated the water, or in many cases over-allocated the water. And here is my good friend. Anyone recognise that bloke? The Prime Minister, exactly. when he was Minister for Water, walking in the bottom of the water supply reservoir for Goulburn, just out of Canberra. And so Australia's already got some glimpses into the future with the Millennium Drought, and some of the measures Mark was talking about are second nature for people in southern Australia because they've lived through some very, very dry times since the late 90s. And it'll be very interesting to see because since Tony Windsor's retirement, this bloke now knows more about water than anyone else in the federal parliament. He knows everything about water from the Romans to the current day. Because one of my contracts as a consultant was to prepare 1,000 PowerPoint slides for Malcolm Turnbull when he was Water Minister on every aspect of water, history, science and policy going back to the Romans. It was the best fun job I've had for a very long time, and he loved it, and he cross-examined it all the time. Up here we've got some other issues too. Sea level rise. Seas off Darwin have risen 18 centimetres in the last 20 years. So it's about 8 mils a year, one of the highest rates of sea level rise in the world, primarily because of the thermal expansion of the Timor Sea. So the waters off Darwin are warming faster than other parts of the world's oceans, and that thermal expansion is leading to a rise in sea level. So we're already seeing out on the floodplain saltwater intrusion into former freshwater Melaleuca wetlands, and the dieback, obviously, of those former paperbark forests are now completely killed by saltwater intrusion. That's why we're getting bits of the Nightcliff bike path falling into the sea when we're not getting without a very big storm. Just because if you happen to get some onshore winds on a high tide, the sea's already this much higher than it used to be. And so we're already seeing significant impacts of sea level rise. Because of growing population and because there's increasing consumption and changing diets, people in China wanting to eat meat and so on, the world has to double food production by about 70% by 2050. Don't know why I've got Queensland in there. Oh, that's because it must have been giving a talk in Queensland. But anyway, Queensland wants to double their production by 2040. Now, normally, as someone who's done a fair bit with ag science, I'd say no problem. Doubling food production in 40 years, the world's done it plenty of times in the past and can do it again. We did it in the Industrial Revolution, we did it in the Green Revolution, and we've done it through intensification and better varieties and more fertiliser and so on. But we've mainly achieved those gains by agriculture getting bigger. Clearing more land, cultivating more land, irrigating more land and pouring on more fertiliser. All of those things are now going to be more difficult to do or impossible to do. And for the first time in human history, we're going to have to figure out how to grow more food without agriculture pushing further into the rainforests or aquaculture pushing further into the mangroves and so on. So, putting all that together, anyone know where that is?
Yes.
Yep, very good. East Arm. Every time I fly in or out of Darwin, I just stick my phone up against the window and take photos. It's surprising how good some of them are. So that's taken with an iPhone while flying out of Darwin. So here's the challenge, and this is why I think everybody here should tell their kids to go and do environmental science at CDU. The world has to decouple economic growth from carbon emissions in a more difficult climate, while somehow breaking that relationship of 1 litre per calorie, getting a lot more out of the energy that we use while making a shift from fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuels is the fundamental cause of the pickle we're in. Making the shift to renewables and working out how to feed everyone while competing with the resources sector for land, as we're seeing in the Darling Downs and the Liverpool Plains and some of our best agricultural soils now having to compete with coal and gas. And hopefully doing it in a way that doesn't further reduce landscape amenity or soil health or animal welfare or human health. And Each one of those is a sort of a technical tour de force, a real moonshot. We've got to try and do them all at the same time. So there's the sustainability agenda for the 21st century. And when I look around, some of the most exciting things that are happening on that whole ambitious palette of things are happening at local government level. They're happening in cities and towns and communities around the world. I'm not going to dwell on this very long, except to say that if you map forward with climate change beyond 2 degrees of warming, so 30 to 40 years, by the end of this century we could be looking at a lot more than that, sorry. And we could be looking at more than 1 metre of sea level rise. And this is about the types of planning that you do for different types of things. And the trouble is election cycles are down here at 3 years. If you're planning suburbs or bridges or whatever, you've got to be thinking 100 years ahead. And in 100 years' time, it's not going to be the same temperature as now, and the sea level's not going to be where it is now. It's going to be quite different. The coastline's going to be in a different place. And so we have to move away from thinking that we're just going to be able to inch along and incrementally adapt. And for the big stuff, we've got to have in our head quite a different place. This is not something that humans have had to think about much in the past. The designers of the Sydney Harbour Bridge were able to just work off mean sea level and away they go. We're going to have to figure out ways of working through this that look at what the Mysoro colleagues call planned and transformational changes rather than just autonomous and incremental changes. So, I mean, there's a whole conference sitting in that slide, so I won't unpack it more for you, but it is something that we need to think about. In terms of the food agenda, I'm not quite sure why I stuck that slide in. It looks a bit leery. I think we should be setting some very high level goals for our agriculture, like doubling food and fibre productivity. Equally, I think Australian agriculture should be a net seller of energy, not a net buyer of energy. We've got plenty of land, unlike a lot of other countries. There's no reason why we can't be producing energy, renewable energy from farmland. But our farming systems need to be a lot less leaky, just like the households in the urban area. Currently they leak water, energy, nutrients, carbon and biodiversity, and young people. We need farming systems that actually attract young, talented people and that don't leak those things. But it's a really exciting time to be in agriculture. Metering, sensing, telemetry, robotics, drones, biotech and so on. There's an amazing revolution happening. Understanding soil microbes. A third of all the food we grow now is just wasted. We don't have to double food production if we just get rid of some of the waste. If we can produce, when I talk about producing renewable energy from agriculture, I'm not talking about turning corn into ethanol. That's first generation biofuels. I'm talking about second generation biofuels, lignocellulosics from tree crops that are about 48 times more efficient than corn ethanol. And they're actually energetically positive rather than requiring more energy than they produce. But for me, one of the revolutions is going to be growing way more food in and around cities. During the Second World War in America, when they had strict food rationing, quite a few cities got the food production within the urban footprint got up above 10% of total supply, just through backyard production and chooks and cows and what have you. And I think if we work on this whole agenda, agriculture will become sexy for talented young people. You'll hear a bit about wanting, less said about it in the white paper than there was prior to the last federal election, but there's still people who want to dam the rivers up here. And Josh Frydenberg was up here last week the new Minister for Northern Development, and regrettably, in my view, talked about all these rivers flowing out to sea and all that water going to waste. You'll see this, that 60% of Australia's runoff is in the north, and it's all just flowing out to sea. We should be doing something with it. Well, in fact, all of that water is currently used. The water budget is closed. If you take some water out from some use now and use it for something else, you'll be having an impact. So we now, and Dave Crook will be giving a fabulous talk about this at Water in the Bush on Friday, we're now tracking barra throughout their life cycle and from the catchment to the coast and so on. And you can see that the floodplains are critically important for the productivity of the system and for the productivity of the fish and for the prawn populations and so on. So if you reduce the ability of the river to flow out across the floodplain, you're going to have a big impact on barra and prawn populations. The nutrients that go out of these systems drive the marine productivity of the fisheries in the marine system. And so it's not water going out to waste, it's actually the ecosystem functioning. And if you go and stick corks in that or reallocate water, then you're going to be having impacts and you better understand them. Apart from that, there aren't many good places to put a dam up here because the country's very flat, and that means your dams are shallow, your evaporation rates are enormous, so it's an incredibly inefficient way of managing water. But if we fly 1 hour from Darwin, we're in Dili, and there we have 40% of people malnourished, incredibly high rates of infant mortality and so on. Most people hungry for some months of the year. So that is a food security issue. But they have terrific soils, well certainly a lot better than ours, and the scope for us to increase food production there would be enormous if we just partner with one of the 5 poorest countries on earth that's 1 hour's flight away. And so thinking about how we can deploy our expertise, if I wanted to feed Northern Australia, that's the place I'd do it from. If you're a farmer and the world was your farm, then Java would be your best paddock and Northern Australia would be one of your worst. So you'd actually grow the food where you've got good young volcanic soils. You can fatten a crowbar in the slopes on the slopes of Mount Merapi. And you wouldn't be trying to do it here. But these guys need an enormous amount of help, and it's expertise that we've got. So thinking about the way in which we deploy our resources, I think, is quite interesting. So, what's our role in feeding the region? And some of the early talk prior to the election was that we should be, feeding the world with all this water we've got in the north. Well, Australia currently feeds about 60 million people out of 7 billion. So we produce about 1% of the world's food supply. If we doubled that, we'd produce 2% of the world's food supply. So the notion that we're going to solve a big global food security problem's a bit ridiculous. However, through our agricultural development programs, we influence food supply for about 500 million people. And that's a really significant contribution. And yes, there's some profit to be made from exporting things into particular market niches at particular times. The sandalwood guys seem to be doing that now. Not that you can eat sandalwood, but high value product, high value market, discretionary market, doesn't need a cool chain. Don't have to refrigerate it. Sell it in tiny little bottles that you can store for ages with no refrigeration. Really suits Northern Australia. But if you think about the people who are hungry, they can't afford to buy stuff at Australian prices anyway. So I've long been saying that the biggest export we can have that will help the world is between our ears. Australia has been operating in the most variable climate ever since, well, from time immemorial. And so our agricultural systems are actually adapted to droughts and flooding rains. Other countries are now just starting to get a level of variability they haven't had in the past. We've done some really good things like land care and what we've learned about water governance. If you think about all the water reform journey that Australia's been through, unbundling water property rights from land, water trading systems, amazing advances in catchment management, understanding groundwater, surface water interaction and so on. Environmental flows, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, all these innovations that haven't been tried anywhere else in the world, and we've had to do them out of necessity. So Australia has an amazing amount to offer. But I actually think that we should be looking at another solution. We shouldn't be feeding the region, we should be powering it. So I'm going to take you on a tiny little detour. This contour map is actually a contour map of solar radiation. And there's only 1 or 2 areas in the world that get more than 6.5 kilowatt hours per square metres per day. That's what these ISO heights are. This is extremely high. In other words, lo and behold, Australia is one of the sunniest places in the world. Who would have thought it? Especially Central Australia and Northwestern Australia. To give you an idea, here we get twice as much sunlight per metre squared as Java does, even though they're closer to the equator. It's a lot cloudier there because of their mountains and stuff. You could supply all of Australia's electricity with enough solar panels to cover that red dot. Half a cattle station. You could supply all the world's electricity needs if you had a few cattle stations covered in solar panels, about that size, about twice as big as Tassie. Now, you'd still have a bit of a distribution issue, but that gives you an idea that that amount of sunlight would actually meet total global electricity needs. So I'm going to just float a little thought bubble past you of a snowy scheme for the 21st century, because politicians love saying we need a new snowy scheme. So here's a snowy scheme. We've got this bloody big dam sitting over there in Western Australia near the Territory border called Lake Argyle. Ever flown across it? Fly across it in a Cessna 172. It takes over an hour to fly across the sucker. What we could do, and there are many of these schemes around the world, is we identify one of these hills. Obviously you need to talk to the TOs. You build a bloody great big tank on top of the hill, and you use the sunlight to pump the water up the hill during the day, and it flows down the hill at night through the turbines, and you've got yourself a pumped hydro scheme, of which there are hundreds and hundreds around the world. It's just they're not usually powered by solar. So you hook up a lot of solar panels to a pumped hydro scheme, and you've got yourself 24/7 power in perpetuity. And you run an HVDC cable from Kununurra to Katherine to Darwin to Dili to Denpasar to Jakarta, Singapore, KL, Hong Kong, wherever you like. You run it into the ASEAN countries, and you pump sunlight from northwest Australia right through Southeast Asia, and you integrate all the energy grids. Now, the cost of this in Jakarta would be 8 cents a kilowatt hour. They currently spend 6 cents a kilowatt hour for coal-fired power. We had a workshop on this idea at CDU where we had a whole bunch of Indonesians came along, and this is their slide. We said, when did you do that? And they said, 20 years ago. And they showed us a map of the Indonesian archipelago with a red dot for every volcanic eruption, earthquake or tsunami since 1900. And when you map all them on Indonesia, there's no way you'd ever build a power station in Indonesia. It's the most geologically active area of the planet. Not a sensible place to be putting power stations. And they said 20 years ago we identified our most secure power would be a power line from Australia. They hadn't identified the solar pumped hydro, but they just said this would be the most secure way. Then they said the Australians would never be going to turn it off. And they're absolutely right. We said, wouldn't you be worried about, Australia turning off? And they said, you'd never be game. And so, this idea has actually been published by the ANU and in a reputable engineering journal. Every bit of the engineering is very straightforward. We had the CEO of Basslink at our workshop. So Basslink is the interconnector between Victoria and Tasmania. Hugely profitable. And he's a Yorkshireman, and he said, look, this is very straightforward, the engineering. He said, what's not straightforward is your financial engineering to pay for it. But everything else is very straightforward. So there's great increasing energy demands and energy poverty, and we could put a cable there. With these new cables, they lose about 1% per 1,000 kilometres. Now remember, there's 50% more sunlight in northwest Australia than there is in Java. So you lose a few percent getting it there, but you're still way ahead. And Indonesia's identified that they need a very large increase in production and that they can't get it from coal. And so if you think about the benefits of that, ASEAN already has an energy grid integration working group, the ASEAN countries, because they believe that they're much less likely to ever go to war if they've got integrated energy grids. So that's just to enlarge the thinking a little bit. Now back to Palmerston, which is there. Here's your sewage ponds in the foreground. Thinking about how you put all these sorts of ideas together, I think of it as like an old house that you've got to redo the plumbing and redo the wiring and probably reclad the roof and re-stump the foundations and so on. And the trouble is, it's all very expensive and largely invisible, and from the street the house still looks much the same, but you've spent a truckload of money on it. We need to do something similar at the landscape scale. We need to rewire it so that we're using our energy in different ways and producing it in different ways. We need to re-plumb it so that we're catching the water, not just in the way Mark's talked about earlier, but from our sewage treatment plants and so on, where we're currently just dumping all this nutrient-rich water in the harbour that we could be turning into food. And we need to reclad the landscape to make sure that we've got enough green cover for all sorts of reasons. So if you think about the way we currently do planning, or not, when it comes to the territory, when I first arrived in Darwin about 5 years ago, I was talking to the CEO of the planning department, and I said, I don't see much evidence of planning here. It was a very naive remark, and he said, oh, Andrew, it happens on the back of beer coasters. It was very eloquent, I thought. So we need planning approaches that think about the different climate change and demographic scenarios, and importantly treat all land uses equitably. So at the moment, the oil and gas sector is not subject to the Water Act. And so you've got these inequities across the landscape when you think about the allocation of resources. Thinking about, it's not just about how things go in an average year, how do they go in a big flood or a big weather event? Has the coastline got room to move in those low-lying areas? How are we managing estuaries? Will those estuarine areas be able to move upstream as what they will want to do? Obviously, we've got to deal with the causes by reducing emissions and so on, but thinking about how transport networks work, which obviously comes into suburb design and so on. And I think good soil becomes a strategic national asset, particularly where it's close to transport and so on. And that's where I think the scope to actually build good soil in cities, given that they attract all this stuff, is really important. But as Mark's outlined beautifully tonight, we can't do this stuff if we haven't got the community on board. You should recognise that too. This is Palmerston here and Bladen Point here and so on. I see cities as being the most exciting place to be working because cities suck in water and nutrients and people from around it, and a lot of that becomes waste. And if we can re-engineer our cities, we can turn that waste back into food and to energy. And if you think about the Australian mining, minerals and energy sector, you've got coal, iron ore, gold and so on. What do you reckon would be the next most profitable export commodity after those ones?
Education.
Yeah, knowledge. It's called the METS sector, the Minerals, Equipment, Technology and Services sector. Lots of small firms that are selling services into that sector. I don't see why Palmerston shouldn't position itself as a sustainability ideas hub, an incubator and generator, with a focus on remote, off-grid and tropical applications, and thinking about how you can attract a whole heap of small firms working in that sector here and network with other places around the world. So that's just an idea to leave with you. There's our previous Vice-Chancellor, Barney Glover, went to Aberdeen, which was a rust bucket city in Scotland, but positioned itself as the knowledge hub for the North Sea oil and gas sector. When the Norwegians thought they already had its own up, but Aberdeen basically cut their lunch and has become a really vibrant place with two fantastic universities and just lots of TAFE stuff happening and really profitable firms, attracting people with really good jobs and so on. So I love this quote from, it's actually from Philip Adams back when he was at the Commission for the Future in the 70s. The future's not some place we're going to, but one we are creating. And paths to it are made, not found. It's not some accident that we end up in the future. Our decisions we take every day shape where we're going to end up. And we're making those paths through our actions or our inactions. But either way, we're doing it. The sustainability stuff that I've outlined here tonight is the challenge of the 21st century and beyond. And those things are all joined up. Figuring out how to look at them in an integrated way is going to keep city councils, but other firms and so on occupied for a long time. And I think if you look across the global economy, the green economy is one of the areas that's growing the fastest, has the most jobs, and is one of the ones that's an absolute sure bet. If you look at, we're now seeing the big downturn in the commodity sectors, we're seeing big layoffs in some of these areas that have boomed, but figuring out how to tackle these problems that I outlined, it's not something that's fashionable, it's not going to go away. Humanity doesn't have an option about dealing with these issues. And so if you wanted to say how we're going to position our economy, I think this is a really safe bet. And I know that the Prime Minister's on this same ticket. We're going to change the world one way or another. We're already doing it. And so we should, in my view, try and do it better. So let's go.
Thank you to you both. I mean, well, we've gone from sort of the macro to the micro, in a conversation of global warming to turning off the tap at home. And I think both of them have tremendous importance, because both of them say that we need to do better and reduce and to find different ways of innovating to actually make that happen. And gentlemen that just came up, Bernard Salt,
yes.
In terms of especially the territory and in terms of economic development and demography that is across all those things. Also talked about how we actually need to be entrepreneurial and inventive in terms of how we either save water and indeed save our planet. So thank you very much. Well done.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew. Just in closing, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming, and Nitesh for standing on his feet to film this, which will be available. And I want to tell you how you can look at things that the City of Palmerston's doing. Do go to the website, do follow the links. There's been quite a lot of videoing happening, quite a lot of good stories happening, and this too will be on that as a link if you want to go back in and think again about some of the things that you've heard tonight. And hopefully there'll be some more sessions in the future. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.